All right, my clock says 12:18, so I'll get started now. And with seven of us, if I do a breakout room, we could probably all shove into one breakout room and allow us to talk and see each other. I imagine. I have not used the Hop-In platform before. I see that it's a little bit similar to Zoom, and that's fine. I'll start just by introducing myself. I'm Glen Thielmann. Former high school teacher, I guess, in Prince George, BC, and currently working in the teacher education program at the University of Northern British Columbia. And let me see if I can make this easy. I'll click that. Yeah, there's my hometown of Prince George on the territory of the Tla'aut'�ān:ʌ people, where I am certainly grateful for my opportunity to work and teach there. And I've been there my entire life. I've grown up just a few blocks away from what was once the Tla'aut'�ān:ʌ village, and which was vacated kind of forcibly by the colonial government around 1913. So it's a daily reminder as I walk and drive by the what's now a park of the colonial legacies that exist, and also the power of place, both for myself and for others. I'm curious to know who's in the room today. So if you don't mind using the chat to let us know where you're from and maybe what you teach or what your connection is with the CGE conference, that'd be awesome. I'll give you a moment to do that. All six of you. That's maybe me plus five more. So that's a nice small group. Retired teacher. Excellent. Airdrie, Alberta. Thank you, Stacy. Dini from Toronto. Wonderful. Nicole from Ottawa. 10 to 12. And Nicole, refresh my memory. Ontario curriculum, is it history/geography, or do they combine it into social studies? Oh, perfect. All three. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's interesting in some of the national education conferences. I've been to over the years that the well-defended pros and cons of both systems of having separate courses versus integrated social studies, and certainly advantages and disadvantages to both from all kinds of perspectives. Great, and please feel free to use the chat to throw in questions. I will check it regularly. And this presentation, some of my presentations and workshops and work I've done with teachers in the past have been highly structured and organized. And this one is more of a survey of some work that I've done in the past and I've done in the present and I intend to do in the future. And so it's very a rich field for asking questions and for interrupting me and taking it off into tangents. We just have under an hour, and my presentation is, like most presentations, is longer than it needs to be. So I'll probably skip through some parts that that aren't specifically relevant for maybe where you're at today. I'm happen to be presenting right now from University of British Columbia. I'm here for a BCTF conference, BC Teachers Federation conference. And so I've shifted, I guess, traditional territories as well. I'd be on the Musqueam territories, and grateful to be here as well. Gorgeous day in Vancouver. I happen to have an air-conditioned room, which is fabulous because it is very hot and humid outside. And we make these comments not just to sort of acknowledge our gratefulness, but also to situate ourselves. And it's an interesting thing we find in our classrooms with students, how often we are placeless in a classroom where there is very little reference to the land in which that classroom and school sits. If you're lucky to have views, great. But I think more and more teachers have turned to seeing the classroom as a base camp to launch inquiry outside the classroom. And it's an exciting possibility. So some of the ideas that I offer today will involve leaving the classroom, and some of them can be done inside the classroom as well. And this whole collection of work that responds to place, that engages with place, that sees land as teacher. It's called lots of things, place-based education and so on. I use the term place-responsive learning or place-responsive pedagogy or place-responsive education. And feel free to kind of take whatever we're working with today and put it into your own context, because I think it's important that we redefine some of the ways in which we see the classroom as the primary learning space. I've been doing work around place-based or place-responsive education for a few years now, coming off the heels of being a high school social studies teacher for about 22 years. And with the work I'm doing with the university right now in the teacher education program at University of Northern British Columbia, we've got a signature pedagogy called People, Place, and Land. And the idea is that we are constantly aware of the relationship between our learning as teacher educators and teacher candidates and the students they teach with place, and especially local places, not just generic notions of place. Although when we think global, we're able to sort of connect some of the bigger themes like sustainability and reconciliation and global citizenship. Interwoven into this is the idea that story and place are intimately connected. They're braided together in so many ways. And I'd like us to think maybe today about the power of story work and what kind of possibilities storytelling and narrative have in social studies, humanities, geography, civics classes, and so on. And ways in which this story work can be centered in pedagogy while also responding to curricular competencies. Curricular competencies, of course, are defined differently across the country. I think about 6 out of 10 of our provinces are using some form of the historical and geographic thinking concepts. The historical concepts developed by Peter Seixas et al. And geographic thinking concepts, sort of by Roland Case, et cetera. And there are others have been involved, of course, over the years. Those aren't the only two. But these set of curricula, this curricula across the country has turned from we teach stuff to we teach competencies that leverage stuff. And I think you're probably most of you will be familiar with what I mean when I talk about competency-based education. In geography, this it has to do with sense of place and perspective taking and significance of place and ethical judgments and use of primary source data and so on. In the midst of this, we ask what implications storywork has for interdisciplinary practice, for Indigenous perspectives, spelling mistake there, place responsiveness and assessment. And really, if any new thing that you want to take up these days doesn't have some way of making it interdisciplinary or considering Indigenous perspectives or having an outlet in assessment, it's probably not worth your time. Every workshop I've been to in this conference and past conferences and the ones I'm at right now this week with the BCTF, there's that lens of this is so cool, but would I ever use it or would I pass this on to other teachers? And for bang for the buck, if there isn't a connection to Indigenous perspectives in particular, I think we often say, well, what is that connection, or can I find something else that has that connection that accomplishes the same goals? I think Tyrion Lannister put it best when he asked the following. Perhaps this is no spoiler alert. This is from a few years back. Whoops. Try that again.
What unites people? Armies, gold, flags, stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it. No enemy can defeat it.
The power of story. There we go. Let me advance the screen here. Yeah, the power of story, and I'll get back to about why story in particular is so powerful in the midst of all the other things that we have the options of teaching. I came across this graphic on Twitter a couple of years back, and if you just wiped out history and kind of put in geography, I think you'd get a idea of where I'm going with this. When a teacher sits down to decide what they're going to teach, when they're designing a course, when they're working with other teachers and saying, well, what are you working with over there? You can kind of categorize the work they do as either academic, public, or popular. And academic geography might be that set of structures and categorizations that we learn in university, or that have a not necessarily rigid, but a more structured and esoteric kind of design behind them. Public history is very much wrapped around, in public geography, around accessibility, and popular could be right down to using modern media and memes and entertainment-based accounts in order to bring our stuff across. And really, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of distinction between these three types of approaches to teaching history, teaching social studies, teaching geography. It seems to be a real shotgun approach in most of the classes I've visited over the last 5 or 6 years. Teachers try it all. They have an academic vision. They have a vision for accessibility and connection to community, and they also have a willingness to engage in whatever it takes to engage students. And I think it's probably appropriate. So some of the story work that we're going to look at today comes from all three of these sort of zones of practice. And what a dizzying array of choices there is for social studies teachers. And of course, you know that this isn't the same in every province. Some of you will teach history, civics, geography. Some of you have social studies courses, but you can extrapolate a little bit for your context. All of these things are compelling for a teacher, and yet no teacher can do all of these things. And when you look back, I've done this an exercise with different groups of students over the years. Well, how did you learn how to do social studies? And what do you think was the main theme in the way they learned social studies? If you had to pick one of these approaches. And Lydia, yes, there will be a recording of this event. I think the organizers said they're going to uh, throw out a private YouTube link to all the participants for all the videos. So. Does anyone see one of those things? Like, yeah, that's how I learned social studies back in the day. I did change the wording of these slightly to make it a little less obvious, but the one at the top of the list is one that most people identified as, yeah, that's how I learned social studies. It was historical literacy. It was getting the story of history. It was the facts, the figures, the names, the dates. That's what they learned. That's what they were assessed on. And I'm finding now that teachers are doing way more than just telling the story of history and imparting knowledge of history. There's all these sort of things that are contained in their work, from identity to inquiry to exploring social justice themes through their work, place responsiveness and land-based learning and so on. It's quite diverse. What often hasn't caught up is the assessment. A lot of teachers are still throwing tests in front of students that do require knowledge of that historical timeline or the facts and figures or vocab and so on. And so this is one of the ways that story work can kind of, to go back to the Game of Thrones meme there, it can break the wheel, is to actually challenge some of these things, some of these ideas as being primal in the teaching of social studies. So story work is essentially the work of taking stories and using stories as the basis of understanding, treating stories as serious data, treating the narratives of lived experience from real people over time as respected, honored truths that we can learn from, or banks of truth that we can compare and derive meaning from. And Indigenous story work in particular is a way of using the term from Joanne Archibald, who did a lot of research around this. And it's also a key way of understanding how to decolonize methodologies as well. I wanted to read this one out. When we talk about the concept of reconciliation, I think about some of the stories I've heard in our culture, and stories are important. These stories are so important as theories, but at the same time, stories are important to oral cultures. So when we talk about stories, we talk about defining our environment and how we look at authorities that come from the land, and how that land, when we talk about our relationship with land, how we look at forgiveness and reconciliation is so important when we look at it historically. And this was a live testimony to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And you can tell that Elder Reg Crowshoe has building a picture in his mind and for his intended audience at the time about the interrelationship between story, culture, environment, and I would throw in language as well, just to editorialize. And this is why story is so important, because without story, land, culture, language, identity, meaning don't make sense. Storywork is also a methodology for uncovering meaning and doing sense making. And Cynthia Kurtz is a real master with this concept, and she's written a number of books on the subject. I'm not sure. I think I will probably just give you the link to my website where I link a lot of these quotes and ideas and sources and so on, as well. The presentation will be available afterwards. I made this graphic a while back just to try to place for myself why storytelling is at the heart of social studies. And I think we look at how drivers of our modern system, our modern education system, and certainly in British Columbia, if not increasingly across Canada. Alberta certainly had a bit of a track reversal in recent years, but we'll see how things go over the next couple of years if they get back on track in terms of a progressive curriculum. But when we look at the ongoing influence of global trends in education, such as the competency-based approach, which isn't going away despite what's happened in Alberta, if we look at the inclusion of Aboriginal or Indigenous knowledges and perspectives, which is so important and I'd say increasingly at the heart of any new educational reform agenda taking place anywhere in Canada, if not significant parts of the world. And the other driver of personalized learning, of development of core competencies like thinking skills, communication skills, personal responsibility, social and ecological responsibility, and the ongoing need for differentiation. Again, these things, whether you want them or not, they're not going away. These things are always driving anything new that happens in education. And this might simplify it a little bit, but I really believe that if you boil these things down, you see storytelling in the middle of it. Storytelling is what's going to allow us to connect self, that bottom driver, with Indigenous perspectives, with the goals of the education system on the left there. So I'm hoping I'm making a case to you for responding to place or for using storywork. And one of the simplest ways to get into storywork is to apply, of course, Grinsner's uh, three-part question of what's there, and why care. And this featured prominently in one of the earlier workshops I was in today with the CGE, where the presenter displayed some beautiful images and then offered some sort of critical thinking tools and responses to these images. And these images, these are from Canada. They have the potential for students to start building inquiry and asking questions of what's going on there. Where is this location? Why is it happening there? And is there any reason we should care about it? What kind of action should we take? To me, this is a shortcut to those competencies I referred to, those geographic thinking skills and so on, which are so common in curricular across the country. So just a little quiz for teachers here. Top right, we might be looking at urban sprawl, and you're all probably all pretty good teachers, this sort of thing. You look at a picture like this and you always start thinking about the questions you'd ask students about why, about how, about when, about what's driver, what the implications are, and so on and so on. How about bottom left? Where's that? Throw it in the chat if you know where that is. What's where? Why there? Why care? Okay. What's where? Okay, yeah, I've seen it. I thought I've seen it both ways, but I looked at that one, Paul. Oil sands, yes, you bet. That's near Fort McMurray, Alberta. And on the right, that was an event from last year. Anybody know where that is? Bottom right. Yeah, you bet, Stacey. These were the BC floods in the wake of atmospheric rivers that poured through southern British Columbia last year in November. And this flooded Sumas Prairie in the Fraser Valley and put most of it underwater. It was a little bit complicated how it happened. There's some new mechanisms behind it. But one of the dimensions of the story is that this was the site of a former lake called Sumas Lake in the traditional territories of at least one Indigenous group in the Fraser Valley, and that lake was very important to their livelihood and transportation systems and all kinds of reasons. That lake was drained in the 1920s to make way for modern agriculture, and since then they've had at least 3 or 4 major flood events that have returned it back to being a lake again. So there's a whole story about Indigenous land rights and access and access to resources, among other things, that's sort of built into some of these pictures. You've done this work with students before. What do you see on the surface? Identifying things that are going on in the image or the map or the primary source or whatever it is. And then what's going on beyond the surface, behind the surface, implications or guesses or hunches or theories and so on. I'd suggest that with story work, the closer to home, the better the story is. So I put 3 images up that come from my hometown of Prince George. And one is the pulp mills, and behind this there's an oil refinery as well, which are the major sources of air pollution in our city. There's also a homeless camp that's sprouted out not too far from my house, actually, down a bank. And it's been in the news lately because of the homeless situation in Prince George and the need for housing, accessible housing, as well as the need for accessible rooms and shelters, emergency shelters, and so on for the homeless that have low barriers to access. And then another image of the Memorial Park, which used to be called Fort George Park, with this sort of old style fort structure, bastion sort of structure, which was built long after it was a fur trade fort. It has zero relevance to a historical time period. It was just built because someone thought it looked cool and it fit the theme. And these 3 images, they'd be familiar to students that grew up in my hometown of Prince George. And these all invite inquiry. They ask questions about, or they invite questions about what's going on, why is it there, why there, and why care. And there's probably a relationship between all these 3 photos that the student could make. And we access these things through storytelling, through discussion, through dialogue, through throwing out potential narratives, through building accounts, through challenging those accounts, and so on. And students have an innate ability to be storytellers. This is something we know, and something that they often don't get a chance to develop well during their high school years. Now, I might be a little bit cynical, but you probably wandered through school sometimes and you've looked at the amount of transmission that's taking place from teachers to students, or even the amount of just sort of passive learning where students are sitting there, working through piles of workbooks, fill in the blanks questions, textbook stuff, and the ability for students to start questioning and create narratives and challenge their own narratives and develop their ability as storytellers is sometimes hard to find. And there's almost no wrong way to do it. I think turning out the students' natural ability to be storytellers is just a wonderful pursuit, and not just in social studies and geography, but I think in all disciplines. So over the last 5 years, I've developed one by one resources and tools for teachers to work with students and connect to place through story work. And this is just a sort of a map of all of these things. Some of these are ones I've been doing for 20 years. Some of them are ones I've been doing for a year. Some of the ones I'm just developing now. And some of them are ones that I still haven't even got to yet in terms of beyond a notion or suggestion. And of course, we were not going to go through all of these today, but I want to take a peek at a few of them that are kind of relevant for the theme of the conference. And hopefully that's big enough for you to see. I can share this graphic as well. But these present a number of ideas. Some of them are mine, some of them are borrowed, some of them are really obvious ones that are available to everybody. Some of them are ones that have been covered in the conference today. I don't know if I saw a specific one from Esri on story maps, but at last year's CanGeo conference, there was a presentation on story maps as well. And the categories here are a little rough. Some of these things are so they relate to each other. You might try one from one sector that it connects with another one from another section as well. I intended this to be specifically relevant for social studies, but I realized pretty soon that some of these things are really great for science, good for language arts, and good for all kinds of things. You may recognize some of the words, and some of them might be unfamiliar to you. So let's just take a look at a couple of them to see if we intrigue any questions, or if you've got any further discussion about it. Oh, okay. I'm going to try one of these out first. Yeah, we'll get to the examples a little later. Let's try an activity. This is one of them here from the Heritage Inquiry side, the top short form. Heritage Inquiry is sort of a catch-all term I use to describe these projects where students investigate their own family connections or their community connections or their sense of identity and where it comes from. Family isn't always a concept that plays well with students, and there's often a lot of reasons why. So there's other ways to interpret the idea of family and connect it with community and heritage and identity as well. A lot of people are thrown off these heritage inquiry projects. They're cool, and they win the awards as teachers, kind of thing. But they come at a cost of time, which a lot of teachers don't want to throw days and days or weeks and weeks into these sort of things, and the presentation cycle and so on. So a number of short form ways of doing heritage inquiry, and one of them I developed is called story cards. And the idea was this is a set of cards, kind of like tarot cards almost, where you choose your fate. And there's qualities, artifacts, cultures, and places. And each of the cards has a sort of provocative question about your story, about what you bring to the table in terms of a student or a learner, a person, an entity. Um, there's a teacher's guide that goes with them. There's a list of the questions printed out like in a document, so you can move them around and make your own cards. There's some templates for printing the cards off. A colleague translated into French, so it's all available in French as well. And they're good for K to 12. Really, you can read them out to kindergarten students, and you can have grade 12 students use them. You can pick one a day and just read it out to the whole class and see what you come up with. You can do it at the end of the day and send at home students, and they come back the next day with a story to tell. Or you can do them in groups where they draw cards and respond in groups. And that's the approach that we'll try today. Let me see the best way to do this. If I click that link. This should be the public link. I'm going to put that link into the chat. Put that to the chat. And let's see, there are 10 of us. Let's try 2 breakout rooms. And if someone else besides me, because I own this file, just click on it and see what happens. There's a Word doc, publicly available Word doc show up for you with story cards on it. Great. Okay, great. All right, so let's see how breakout rooms works here. I've never done this before. New breakout. It's loading. Organized by people per room. Yes, I'll do -1 people. No, organized by number of rooms. Let's do that instead. 2 rooms. Regroup after 10 minutes. I don't know if you're seeing what I'm seeing. Probably not. I'll do, about 12 minutes. And I assume this may throw you into a room. The instructions are on that link. So hopefully you'll be able to just do the chat when you're in the breakout room. And the instructions are on that link. Basically, you'll be choosing a prompt, having a quick discussion, sharing a story, and then we'll come back. That may take more than 15. Great breakouts. Breakouts. You will remain in the main session as the moderator. View rooms. So I'm not sure if you automatically get thrown into a room or if you have to choose a breakout room. But if you wouldn't mind distributing yourselves into the breakout rooms if there's a choice. All right, I think I got everyone back now. And thank you for that. And I trust that you've all told some interesting stories. The group I was in, there were some great short stories there. And as I mentioned in the group too, this is a great way for getting some students talking. Students sometimes will just talk. They'll talk about whatever in your classroom spaces. And sometimes they won't talk. They're reticent to engage. I've been talking about this with some students I know that are, and my own children who are, one just finished high school and one's in the middle of it. And I think it's a COVID thing, but and maybe it's just the way in which the world's been shaped by TikTok and meme culture and so on. But students in school spaces and public spaces tend to cluster with smaller groups of friends now and have quieter conversations, and they don't break out. To use the Zoom terminology, they don't break out of those little small rooms until those groupings unless they're prompted to or unless they're motivated to in some way. And when they reach out, they tend to reach out in outbursts, and they'll actually start repeating memes and repeating ways that they interact online in social situations. It's quite interesting. The way in which students engage socially has changed so dramatically in the last, I'd say, 4 years, and then and then 2 years just because of COVID. And so we're in this situation now where teachers are entering classrooms in September, and we want to come back to or recreate some kind of a normal. And that normal is beautiful, warm, rich, thought-provoking discussion between all groups of students that leaves no one else, like the same impossible goal we've always had. And so how do we do it? And these sort of activities are great for getting small groups talking, listening, asking questions of each other, interacting, and so on. And it's different than their sort of TikTok language they come up with when left to their own devices. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, no, this, and Sherry shared a bit of this in our group too. It's a wonderful work to look into. And story prompting and alternate story endings, and telling the story of what happened and the story of how things could have been different and so on. This is, it's a basis for therapy. It's for all kinds of things. It's great work. So like I said, these story cards are available on my website. I print them off and laminate them, kind of makes them a little more intriguing for a student to hold something in their hand rather than just reading it off the screen. But there's lots of ways in which they can be used, and they come with teacher instructions and some connections to curriculum as well. That's what they look like, the covers. I went for some public art by Arthur Rackham. I was kind of going for a fairy tale sort of feeling there. One of the other options on that chart, which I showed you here, the storywork chart, there's a map of the different options available for storywork, is event mapping. And this is a way of sort of kicking up those field trips up a notch. You've maybe brought students outside before where you're not exactly sure what they should be doing to occupy their time while they're out there. And sometimes it's best not to overload them with tons of expectations for how they're supposed to be in an outdoor space. You will find that they will often lead you on that, whether they're grade 2 or grade 12. Once they've broken through the bonds of your classroom walls, they will act in a different way, and that's a good thing. In a classroom, the teacher has controlled almost every spatial variable in that room, what it looks like, where the desks are arranged, whether students can leave the room and go get a drink of water, go to the bathroom or not, or go, vape in the boys' room or in the bathroom. Sorry. All those factors are controlled by the teacher, and how much space is given to each activity, how long it lasts, whether the lights are on or off. And it's a lot of responsibility, and teachers aren't necessarily control freaks all the time. They've done these things for pedagogical reasons, good reasons. But you go outside and those variables are no longer there. Land becomes the teacher. Land controls those variables of light and dark and spatial distance between students, and the objects that are in the room or that line the walls are now trees and streams and buildings and so on. So it's a whole new dynamic. And one of the ways of making sense of that is to actually turn your students into ethnographers that are observing and recording and mapping as they go, jotting down observations, connecting sounds and smells and ideas and so on through event mapping. And it's a wonderful way as well to teach nature journaling to students. And whether it's inspired by those brilliant field journals of days gone by or modern techniques, I definitely suggest old school with paper and pencil and pen sort of thing. But of course, there are digital ways to do this as well as a documenting journeys with photographs. The John Muir's Laws group had a free, massive, beautiful nature journaling book that they had on their website. I'm not 100% sure if it's free anymore, but it's easy to find. The link is there. And you just Google nature journaling, and it's the first thing that comes up as well. And you look at some of the examples of what students and teachers have come up with. I think two of these are from students and 2 of these are from teachers. And inspire your students with exemplars, and have the artist in your class lead the way on the first day, and then let them show others in the classroom what they came up with, and then come back and start working on sketching techniques, working on shading, working on building maps, on putting direction indicators and that sort of thing. And what better way to teach mapping than an actual live experience out in the field? Page 72 in the Geographic Essentials workbook. Story maps are another way to engage in storytelling. This one is often digital, and Esri has wonderful tools for story maps. It used to be free. I'm not sure if it still is, or if your school has to buy a subscription, but it's a whole process using geographic information systems, layered maps to tell stories. They have tons of loaded ones that match up with curriculum all across the country at different age levels, where they're literally guided tutorials for you doing story maps with your students where all that planning work and so on has been done. I like using Google Earth to do storytelling. And let me just see if I can switch now to the screen. Share window. Oh, have I just been me on the screen the whole time? Hopefully you've been seeing this. This is the graphic that was meant to be in the background as I've been talking about these things. The event mapping, yes, you saw that. I'm not exactly sure my slides were showing when you were in the last 5 minutes here. Anyways, okay, the next I wanted to do was to look at Google Earth, so I'll share that window now. Things you learn when you're not on Zoom. Here we go. Google Earth Pro. All right, you should be seeing Google Earth now. So everyone's messed around with Google Earth. Just before this workshop started, I went to the Rocky Mountains, and I just picked a spot in the valley of the Fraser. I live near the Fraser River, and the Fraser River originates the Columbia ice fields. And I just thought, let's go take a look at a cool. That's the Kinbasket. Sorry, where do you go, Fraser? Yeah, here's the Moose River. This valley back in here, and I just pinpointed a number of features. Glacial features, glacial landscapes, geomorphology, if you ever teach physical geography. And students can do this too as an exercise. They can tell stories about where they came from, where their ancestors came from, migration paths. They can explore, World War I, World War II through pinpointing locations. They can look at cut off reserve lands in the prairies. They can examine the Métis resistance in the 1880s. There's all kinds of ways in which you can tell the story using pinpoints and building a tour. It's as easy as dropping a pin, adding a label to it, putting those pins into a folder, and then when it's done, you click the tour button, play tour, and it takes you through each of these things in whatever order you've placed them in. And there's a time lag in between each one, or you can speed it up. So that there's a U-shaped valley. I think there's a 5-second pause or something like that in between each one, and then truncated spurs. I can speed it up, I think, by clicking the next button. Pyramidal peak. Or sorry, a cirque with a tarn. There's a pyramidal peak. And then over to a hanging valley, and an arête, and a braided stream, and fast, a head wall above a cirque, and a truncated spur. I think I primed it. No, that's just because I'm on fast forward more than Nicole. No, that's simple enough, straightforward enough. But the cool thing is that up top you can click the narrate button and add a voiceover, so a student can build these things. I'll kill that now. There we go. They can build this tour, and whether it's social, cultural, political, migratory, geomorphological, whatever the story they're trying to tell, and then narrate it. And they can say, well, this is a U-shaped valley, and it's caused by there being a massive valley glacier that's carved out the sides of the valley over time. And this is a good example. And it doesn't exactly look like a U, but it's more a U than a V shape. That's what we call a U-shaped valley, and so on. They can tell a story around what they know. And then they can submit this as an assessment piece. And holy smokes, a student showing and talking about what they know in real time is way more powerful than filling in a multiple choice test. And you learn a whole lot more for it. So not just as a learning tool and as an assignment tool, but as an assessment tool, these narrated tours are a fantastic way for students to express themselves. There's enough variety in here. They can be creative and whimsical with it. Their voice and the kind of things they talk about can let their identity lead the way. But the tool itself is the same for everybody. So there's a sort of an equity here, and you avoid the sparkles phenomenon. When you have two students submit a poster, and the one that has the sparkles on it gets a higher mark because it looks better. This is a way to kind of level the playing field there a little bit. All right, I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to share my slides again. We're just about done, actually. This has gone pretty quick. Window, slides. Yeah, I'll just burn through a couple more of these, and my website explains them in more detail. Soundwalks draws on the work of R. Schaefer for doing deep listening experiences in soundscapes, and paying attention to the way in which sounds craft our own or shape our own experience of place. And uh, really, really beautiful work around that. And I've got the links on my website for all the activities and how you get into it, and how to clean your ears beforehand, so to speak, to prepare yourself for sound. That was just a wild sound I captured from the halls at UNBC that had about 8 things going on. They're nice to capture sounds and then use them with students to ask them what's going on here. What do you think you're listening to? I've got a section on my website under storywork on assessment narratives and using storytelling as a way of testing, of having students basically talk, write about what they know. And there's a section there on oral interviews as well to get that side of things. In my later years of teaching, conversations with students. What do you think about? What do you know about this? And to actually listen to them talking about what they've learned, so much more informative than almost 90% of the test work and the written work and the assignments they submitted, which are necessary, but they come with their own set of problems as well. Sometimes when students are just writing and submitting things that they worked on outside of class. If you're looking for cool projects that integrate language, storytelling, place, history, culture, take a look at the Governor General award-winning projects for Governor General's History Awards. A lot of them are really about social studies and geography. Fantastic project-based learning ideas to see where these things can end up. Community inventories is a base level kind of study of the area around your school or where you work, where students or teachers on a Pro-D session wander and make notes, and they look at cultural landscapes, you look at physical landscapes, and you start thinking about how your school relates to the place in which it's situated. And again, the website has sort of a who, what, where, why, and when of these community inventories. There's some examples there. Okay, and that's probably good. I'm going to skip through all that, and let's just kill this presentation right now by stopping sharing. There we go. And yeah, was there any questions? Someone said, what was that? Sparkles phenomenon, yeah. Yeah. Oh, that process, by the way, Google Earth, when you've done the tour and you added the narration to it, and you click Save As, and it's the extension is KMZ. It's a KMZ file, and a student can do it and email that to the teacher, or throw it in their inbox or Dropbox, or they can show it live to the class. Really, really easy way for students to submit and to narrate their own assignments. And simple storytelling. It can be one place on Google Earth that they just simply talk about, and then hand it in, throw it in, or whatever. It's also great for students that don't like doing live presentations. They can go to town on the recording part and try it over and over and over again, and work that in. Digital storytelling, that's a huge topic, of course. And those are just 2 examples I gave: the GIS story maps through ARC or through Esri, and then using Google Earth as a way of doing storytelling. But probably lots more to be said about that. You might need to ask me a more specific question if you want. If there are any other questions about this, and like I said, it was Thielmann.ca is my website, and there's a link there called Storywork, and it's under development, but I've got a few pages worth of the stuff, mostly the stuff we talked about today, that are on there. And that big chart with all those options of storywork, that's on that page as well. I'm starting to build those out. Part of it relates to my PhD research that I've started. Part of it relates to what I teach at the university, and part of it's just like procrastination for me. I work on that stuff instead of the things I'm supposed to be working on. Yeah, so thank you for that. Bit of a rambling journey through my mind over the last hour here, and I appreciate you stopping by. And this might be it for the conference. So thank you all for, especially those on the West Coast that got up really early. And I hope you have a enjoyable rest of your day. Take care, all.